Well, hey there team, welcome back to the channel and welcome to my review of Last Train Home. So, geez, where to begin with this? I will front load this information. I enjoyed my time with Last Train Home. As far as, objectively, time well spent, money well spent, absolutely. I got my time out of it. It's retailing for $60 Australian, I believe, which by my maths is 12 hours minimum of gameplay. For those that aren't across it, I'm a kind of a reluctant reviewer. I don't really like the landscape of reviews and how it's all about bloody writing essays and that sort of thing. I just want to talk about a game that I play. But as far as any sort of objective constraints, I would say if I give a game $5, it should give me an hour of clean gameplay. I don't believe that's unreasonable, and so that's what applies here. So as far as those sort of tick boxes go, yeah, cool. And there are flashes of brilliance in this game. And a part of me, and I wonder if people be really honest with themselves, I want this to be a good game. And so you got to be careful you don't let that carry too much weight. Just because it's ticking all of the boxes and that's what you want doesn't necessarily make it so. And the more I played this, the more I kind of fell out of love with it. So there are some caveats going into my recommendation. I did enjoy it, and I would suggest checking it out for sure if this is something that interests you. But as much as there are some really cool ideas in here, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work. And unfortunately, I've run into a lot of bugs that just the nature of this type of game, and we will elaborate, but the nature of this type of game and the setting, the bugs were kind of exponentially more damaging to the experience than most other genres, perhaps. All right, let's start with the setup. The setup is one of the most interesting things and really fascinates me. I enjoy history as much as the next dude, but this is a big blind spot for me. So this takes place on the back end of the Great War. And now I'll probably butcher this because this is all foreign to me and I'm just a casual normie and I've picked up what I have as I've gone along. But essentially, it would seem that Czechoslovakia has been granted, I don't know if it's even independence, foundation, right? It's been created on the back of the Great War. And so essentially Russia, or whatever it was called at the time, and you play a unit of Czechoslovakian legionaries who are, essentially interested in getting home post-Great War finale. However, it would seem that the Russian Union is collapsing and going into a civil war state between the Reds and the Whites, and all of this is very new to me. So the problem is that you're trapped in this collapsing state, and if you were to interfere, you potentially compromise the sanctity of the founding of your nation. So there's some serious stakes, and the game kind of confronts that boldly with this Reds communist faction just basically doing everything they can to antagonize you, whether it's, proactively in attacking you, but also just killing and taking shit from all the villagers because they said so. It's very, very fascinating. And as such, the direct route home west is kind of blocked to you. There's a sort of front line that you can't go through. So you're loading up onto a train and heading east to get to a port to then go back around. So there is that political component of trying to stay a neutral party, but of course there are people that just don't want to leave you alone. So the setup is wonderful. I think it's a really, really interesting narrative. Mechanically, it sits in a weird space. In a way, it's kind of like a Total War game in that it does a hybrid gameplay loop, which kind of works. I have my criticisms of it. This might be a spicy take. Right, I'm going after Total War, specifically like the Warhammer games. Then I don't think that they're bad games. What I think is that they lack synergy. I think there are two games in the Total War games, which is the Overworld Grand Campaign and the Skirmish Level Battle. But I don't actually think they synergize very well. In fact, if you have a look, a lot of people play just the Grand Campaign and they auto-skip 90% of the battles. And you can even have a look at YouTube. There's a whole bunch of people where all they do is play the skirmish mode. They set up battles. Their interest is more in that real-time strategic movement than the overworld campaign. both those modes are actually really, really good. And I feel like it might even be a value proposition because you can play so many hours of a Total War campaign in either mode. You're kind of getting two really high quality games for the price of one. So look, I wish nothing but success to the Total War games, and I've enjoyed playing them, but I forever hold to that they lack any cohesion between the two gameplay modes, and the fact that they can be so involved and you could spend 30 to 60 minutes in either mode before you switch mode, it just hurts any semblance of pace or flow that you might have been having in the previous mode. So I mention that because this game's sort of doing something similar. You've got your overworld train mode, and then you've got like an RTS sort of company of heroes come hero shooter, like not quite MOBA, but it's less about 100 dudes at the RTS level and more about individual guys with skill shots. And those missions will blow out to 30, 40 minutes easily. Now, the time does kind of escape you. Like, I found myself really enjoying it and playing it, but I feel that the same concern that I have with the Total War type games is that there is a kind of lack of cohesion. And honestly, the overworld train stuff is interesting as a gimmick at first, but it kind of becomes a pain, a bit of a chore. It becomes very fiddly, slotting and re-slotting dudes, and so it's one of those things that the luster comes off of it after a few hours. So I would say that the RTS component in the scenarios is absolutely the strongest part, and it does kind of get like having to sit through the other gameplay loop and wait for it to finish before you get into the better part of the game. So I think that's one of the really big problems with this. There is a little more of a nuanced design issue that is in the conversation that is save scumming. Now, I personally am really against save scumming. I think you're using a meta mechanic to circumvent gameplay mechanics. If the game wants you to have a tough time with permadeath and all that sort of stuff, going out of it into a menu to load a save to get around what the game wants you to experience is kind of cheap. But at the same time, if that experience isn't working or landing properly and someone is driven to save scum because the mechanic is not clean, then I can't really blame a player for trying to do that. Using the Total War example is an interesting one because if you were to have an RTS battle that's not really going your way, I think people are probably apprehensive to save scum in that scenario because it's kind of hard to pinpoint where your battle went wrong other than starting it all over again. So it's not like you can load back 2 minutes to avoid a certain cavalry charge or anything like that. It's more that once the battle is in flux, there's no clean way to scum out of the bit where you lose your favorite unit. You'd have to just do the whole thing again, which I think in a way discourages that sort of save scumming. Likewise, in something like XCOM, which is turn-based, while I'm not saying, like I said, I am squarely against save scumming, I do understand that you can at least roll back 1 or 2 turns to avoid one misstep or something like that. It doesn't really upset the flow of your game or anything. The issue with this RTS scenario that goes for like 30 or 40 minutes is that the save scumming is so incredibly accessible. You could just spam quick save F5 and reload every 30 seconds. But the high lethality of this game, as much as I enjoy playing the RTS component of this, all of your units are like named characters with XP. You know, they are an actual much bigger investment than what an RTS unit normally is. It's no big deal if you lose a bloody Zergling or something like that. In this, it can be actually pretty bad, and the lethality is all over the place. 90% of the time, you can kind of blob run around and outplay units, but you will walk into a blind spot which is held down by like an LMG emplacement or an artillery emplacement, and all of a sudden it can just delete dudes straight away. So that while that lethality is interesting, I believe that 99% of people are going to just save scum and take that back, and they're going to feel cheated. That the flow that the game teaches you is you kind of just rumble through the game, stomping everything, and then all of a sudden you go around a blind corner that kind of feels cheaply designed to catch you off guard, and it deletes half your squad. And so people will save scum. And again, I'm not even necessarily judging on the save scum thing, but this game is built around that kind of managing you have a graveyard tab. When your dudes do die and you let them die, which I let happen, they hold vigils, and there's a big part of the game that revolves around letting your dudes die, and yet the lethality of it feels kind of cheap, very high impact. And because this game is narrative focused and it's not really run based, I would even argue that XCOM is more run based. You do it for a couple of hours and then you re-roll and do it better. This game is very long. And so what I'm trying to get at, and it's so difficult to describe, is that the gameplay loop, the meta loop, is not well considered. Most people aren't going to re-roll at the beginning. They're going to treat this more like a party-based RPG, like a Baldur's Gate or something like that. And they're never going to let any one dude die. As soon as one of your guys dies, they're going to just save scum it. And I feel like that's going to have implications on the entire economy of the game as you go further and further, because you're trying to balance resources and train carriages and food and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like the game is encouraging people to behave that way, and they're kind of just going to ruin the experience in the back end when their power creep becomes so high. So yeah, that's my main sort of thought. The moment to moment in the early stage when it's all new is really interesting and fun. The theme is great. The whole idea of having a train base, it's really, really good. But the longer the game goes on, the more you start to realize it doesn't actually really work very well. Couple that with bugs, like I had dudes, for whatever reason, they were locked into the wrong loadout. So I'd be loaded into a scenario and my dude decided he was a train engineer, which is not something physically possible to happen in the RTS space. That happened more than once. So I just have guys in my units that decided to spurg out halfway through the mission and just didn't have guns. And so that's kind of a big deal. I also had on multiple occasions guys go missing, but not really. I couldn't deploy them. They were grayed out, and it wasn't because I didn't have the weapons to deploy them, because that's a different warning. So they were just grayed out, like dev branch not working. The dude's literally in my train. I could move him around from carriage to carriage, but I couldn't deploy him. I couldn't put him into a job slot or anything like that. And it'd be multiple guys. And then when I would get to the next region checkpoint to leave, the game would warn me, hey, you're going to leave dudes behind. And there were no deployed squads, because you do get little squad layouts. So the game has somehow, on multiple occasions, mind you, I kind of rage quit the second time it happened to me. It's saying that I'm leaving dudes behind, and yet there is no indicator at that. The game just decided that I was, and it was actually just deleting and graveyarding dudes inexplicably. Now, maybe something's going on there that I somehow don't understand, because it doesn't telegraph very well. The readability is not great, but I'm almost certain that it's just bugging out. And again, this ties back to the issue where you want a narrative game about survivors and being pushed to the edge, and it's about managing resources, and those resources are your people as well. But when you have these bugs where they can just get deleted, and these moments where they can die in a split second, and yet you have access to save scum back 60 seconds to save the dude, it doesn't work. So look, it's a cool idea, and honestly, my takeaway is give it a go, check it out. I enjoyed my time, right? So I'm not saying that this is a bad experience, but I would be more than anything interested to see what their next game is and what they learn from this. Anyway, those are my major thoughts. I don't need to waffle any more than that. Take that info, make up your own mind. Team, we might just leave it there for the time being. I'll catch you guys on the next one.